All right, Tamie, I am super excited for this episode. You were one of two people that were like instrumental in my healing journey and me becoming who I am today. And I truly mean this, like without your help, I probably would not be where I am today. Like you helped me understand some of the things that I had gone through when I was younger on such a deep level. But rather than just validating what I went through, the narcissistic abuse that I went through and the codependency, you helped me find solutions to bring those things to the surface and heal them and respond to them with love. And it was some tough shit. It was some really tough work, probably the toughest few months of my life, but the most beneficial because it really has allowed me to be the person who I am today and understand my own worth. So for that, I really do thank you.
My pleasure. Such an honor to have had the opportunity to work with you and to watch you just bloom. Such an honor. My honor and my privilege, Alec.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the best place to start is, I guess, what led you to be a life coach that focuses on codependency and narcissistic abuse recovery?
Wow, that's actually a big question. there's a lot behind that, but I suppose the most succinct answer I can give you is the truth of it is I had a previous career that came to an end. The universe showed me in multiple ways that it was time, after 20 years of selling residential real estate, it was time to move in a new direction. And I had always had this idea in the back of my head that I could be a life coach because I'd had such amazing experiences working with life coaches. They were such a big contributing factor to my own healing and recovery over the years. But it was just sort of this, background sort of voice that was there for a very long time. And truth be told, the initial interest was I wanted the freedom laptop lifestyle. It was time to make a shift in a new direction career-wise, and I was enamored with the idea of being able to leverage the internet to grow a business. So it all started with developing my skills as an online marketer. And while doing so, I was working with a coach to help me with my online marketing skills. And he was the one who gave me the kick in the butt that I needed to step into my mission and my purpose. He could see that I wasn't living my full mission, and that he looked at me one day and said, look, you're a coach and you need to get on path or I'm not working with you.
Oh man.
Yeah, you really held my feet to the fire. And
so he just saw something in you that like you knew it. You just like everything clicked with you being a life coach.
Pretty much. Well, it started with online, you're a coach. And I literally spent 6 months saying, okay, I surrender, asking for guidance, right? I know he's right intuitively. I surrender, but what does that mean? I had enough of a background that I could have gone into health coaching. I had enough of a background that I could have probably, developed the skills to coach online marketing. And I knew that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to talk about all day. So it took about 6 months, and it was another coach while I was trying to figure out, okay, I'm a coach, but what does that mean? Who am I? The next coach that I was working with looked at me and said, listen, what's the biggest, ugliest, nastiest problem you know how to solve? And I immediately knew what it was, because it was the biggest, ugliest, nastiest, most painful problem I had solved in my own life. Mm-hmm. And so between those two mentors, the universe used them to really put me on my path. And it was, fundamentally taking everything that had worked for me in my own healing and recovery journey. I was born into a very narcissistic family. Mm-hmm. Both of my parents would qualify. My mother for sure is high spectrum malignant narcissist, in my opinion and experience, undiagnosed, nonetheless. And my father was a narcissistic alcoholic. And the family at large on both sides, there was very intense and severe levels of dysfunction. And given the position that I had as the family scapegoat, from conception, there was trauma and narcissistic abuse coming at me from a number of angles. And my own personal healing and recovery journey over a long period of time brought me to a place of such peace and freedom and personal empowerment. And then, you know, my own searching in terms of digital marketing. Okay, I'm a coach. What does that mean? They just eventually converged. And I feel that I am now fully walking out the reason I landed on the planet and lived all that I lived for the first 30 or 40 years of my life.
To be able to help other people. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super rad. Like that you actually lived out and experienced the things that you are trying to help other people live out, and heal from their experiences. Now, for the people listening that are unfamiliar, what is narcissistic abuse and what is codependency?
Codependency fundamentally is a breakdown in the relationship with self that then extends to maladaptive relating attitudes and behaviors with others. So Dr. Ross Rosenberg coined the term self-love deficit disorder, and I think that's actually the most accurate way to describe what codependency is. Like narcissism, there's a continuum, there's a spectrum, there's a number of ways that codependency can manifest. It's not, these are never black or white issues. I say it all the time. And, you know, codependency may manifest with a number of characteristics or maladaptive ways of relating in one individual and somewhat differently in another, and they can both be equally codependent. So it's a little bit complex, but it really boils down to self-love deficit disorder. And then your other question was, what was narcissistic abuse? So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-5, narcissistic personality disorder is on the DSM-5. It's one of the five. So again, there's a continuum, there's a spectrum. When we're talking about someone who is high spectrum, we're talking about someone who is personality disordered. Unfortunately, I believe that the majority of these people, even high spectrum, especially high spectrum personality disordered individuals, go undiagnosed and then, of course, untreated by virtue of what they have, right? So it fundamentally boils down to a personality, a cluster of personality traits that are very harmful and destructive to relationships, and more often than not can be identified by arrogance, grandiosity, a sense of entitlement, extreme self-absorption, but more than anything, a lack of empathy and a lack of conscience. So folks who, you know, whether or not they landed on the planet this way, or, you know, is it nature, is it nurture? Did they land on the planet this way, or is it a question of having experienced severe trauma in early childhood? The bottom line is there is a split in the subconscious where there's a real disconnect. The wires that connect for folks like you and I who have empathy, who have a conscience, you know, if we do something wrong, we feel it. Those wires don't connect for people who land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. And that spectrum, that continuum, goes all the way to psychopathy, sociopathy. Right? So narcissistic abuse fundamentally boils down to being exposed one way or another in a relationship. This could be with your family of origin, a romantic partner, at work with a boss, a colleague, your neighbor, you know, being exposed to an individual who is lacking in empathy, lacking in conscience, feels absolutely entitled to do or say whatever they want, irregardless of the effect, impact, consequence on another individual. And no one should call them out on it.
Mm-hmm.
They're entitled to behave in the most appalling, abusive, destructive ways, and they fully lack the ability to comprehend, to empathize with the effects of their behaviors and attitudes on others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess my next question to that would be for someone who is like, what are some key indicators of someone who has been abused by a narcissist or dealt with like the narcissistic abuse side of things, and then one of their parents or like they themselves had codependency issues being connected to that narcissist?
People who have been narcissistically abused tend to really struggle with an awful lot of self-doubt
Mm-hmm.
and high anxiety and cognitive dissonance. One of the maladaptive relating behaviors, one of the abuse tools, one of the relationship crimes that someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism will use in a relationship is gaslighting. And gaslighting fundamentally means causing you to doubt your reality. So,
Severing you from your intuition, right?
as well, right? And when that happens to folks, like it did for me at a very young age, what happens in our lives in the first 5 to 7 years really programs us subconsciously. So if you've had the great misfortune, like many of us have, to have been raised by deeply unconscious people hurting people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I tell my clients, it's not about blame, but we do have to, put the responsibility where it belongs and tell ourselves and where appropriate others the truth about what went on if we want to have any real hope in lasting healing and recovery, right? But if you've been born into that type of an environment where the authority figures around you treat you poorly, abuse you on any level, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, physically, sexually, whatever it is, and then blame you for the appalling behavior and attitudes, you're literally programmed and wired subconsciously to grow into an adult and recognize that behavior as love. We're drawn to it like a moth to flame because it is literally part of our subconscious programming and wiring until we up level and heal that stuff, which is what I learned to do so well in my own life, that I was able to transfer that, up level my skills and all of it, but transfer that to the work that I do today with my clients. It really is about coming into the subconscious and making contact with all of that so that you can heal it and be free from that subconscious patterning and the ways that plays out in our lives, right?
Yeah. I was smiling there for the people listening because I can't help but draw parallels with what Tammie's describing. Also, because I've lived this myself and also healed it with Tammie's help myself going through her program. And once you have the wherewithal to understand and then heal the own narcissistic abuse that has been inflicted upon you, and it happens to a lot more people than many realize or are willing to acknowledge, you are able to recognize it on the collective scale so much easier. And I just couldn't help but sit and think through some of the things that she was saying. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now too are like, yeah, that looks a lot like what's happening amongst society right now. But
it is
yeah.
happening on a mass scale. If you want to understand narcissistic abuse, have a look at what's going on our planet currently.
Yeah. And I want to get into that in a little bit. The next piece that I wanted to touch on. So I've seen this issue when discussing with people that like on the collective scale of what's going on, who are under the grips of this very narcissistic system that seem to be almost in a codependent relationship with that system, where they believe that system is showing them love, right? But even on the individual level, when a person is codependent and so almost trauma bonded to that narcissist, and you try to point it out to them, they lash out at you. I wondered if you could touch on that a little bit.
Well, denial is a very effective protective strategy. It's a very effective coping strategy. It's how I survived personally the first 4 decades of my life, exposed to a family of origin who couldn't have given a flying expletive,
Oh, you can cuss on here if you want to.
about my well-being, right?
Yeah.
They put on a good performance for anybody who was watching, but the reality is, again, many of us who, not all of us certainly, but many of us who have been on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse throughout our lives identify also as having been the family scapegoat, because that's where the original programming begins, right?
Yeah, if you could
So
describe that real quick, like what is the family scapegoat in that situation?
So in, most families, 85 to 95% of families on planet Earth are considered to be dysfunctional, which means less than nurturing to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in a reasonably, relatively healthy family where you were loved, supported, nurtured, you had positive things said and reflected back to you, you are actually the minority on this. You're not the norm. The majority of us are come from some level of dysfunction, and obviously some of us more than others. And as I went into that, I just forgot your question. Can you repeat the
No,
question?
yeah, the question was, so the original one was denial, which we can touch on again.
Family
Yeah.
scapegoat.
Yeah, family scapegoat was the second piece.
Yeah. So, in a dysfunctional family system, there are patterns of roles, survival roles that are assigned or taken on by individual family members, quite unconsciously, but quite predictably. You look at any family unit and you're going to find a hero, or otherwise known as the golden child. You're going to find the chief champion enabler. You're going to find the lost child. You're going to find the family scapegoat. And we can go into more detail there, but the bottom line, just to give you sort of a little, just to touch on the family survival roles, the role of the family scapegoat really is where the rest of the dysfunctional family unburdens themselves. What they carry in their subconscious, 95% of the game of life is subconscious. Only 5% of the game of life is conscious. And the more unresolved wounding and trauma that individuals or the family unit carry in their subconscious, the more they need to project that somewhere, because the load itself is too heavy a burden for the individuals or the family unit to carry. Mm-hmm. So each dysfunctional family has a chosen scapegoat. That is the person who is always to blame, always wrong. All of the wrongs that go on in the family, all of the problems that go on in the family, all of the shortcomings that, the different characters playing out their roles in the family might possess, it all gets cast onto the family scapegoat. So the family scapegoat really boils down to being the family dumping ground and garbage bin. And it's as if there is this unconscious agreement within the family unit that it's okay to target this one individual. It's okay to blame, shame, criticize, abuse, abandon, neglect, ghost, ostracize, marginalize, smear, lie about, lie to, crucify this one individual. And in doing so, we lighten our own load of the burden of our subconscious stuff that we are unable to own, accept, acknowledge. And when we get into the realm of people who land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, by virtue of what they have, they carry a lot of unresolved stuff in their subconscious. So they need to unburden themselves. Yeah. And the scapegoat is the favorite target.
Yeah. And I feel like more often than not, at least, I mean, you could obviously answer this much better than I could, but from what I've seen, a lot of the times the scapegoat is more understanding than the other ones of what is going on to some degree.
Absolutely.
And when they draw attention, tell everyone else what's going on, the people who are caught up within that delusion in that system cannot see it and continue to just blame the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm. The scapegoat is often the rebel in the family who isn't buying the bullshit, who sees it for what it is and has the courage to stand up and speak the truth. And when we're talking about dysfunctional family dynamics, especially if we're talking about the realm of narcissism, destructive narcissism, if one or both of the parents land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, if that's the culture, like in my own family of origin, we're talking about generations of untreated chronic alcoholism and all that goes along with that. And all that goes along with that, by the way, is sexual abuse, incest, violence, poverty. I mean, every horrible thing that manifests in, unconscious human experience, right? So often the family scapegoat, I have a theory that not only are they the rebels who have what it takes even at 5 years old to say no, or that's wrong, right? I also very much believe in the concept of starseeds and light workers. And
Yeah,
I
me
believe
too.
more often than not, certainly in my experience, this resonates as true in many of the clients that I work with. More often than not, those that are cast as the family scapegoat are those that carry the most power, the most light. They're here on this planet to assist in the ascension process, and they're here to anchor specific frequencies, and those frequencies are very disturbing to energy vampires, very disturbing to the darkness.
Yeah, they almost can't be within they it's because the light worker starseed scapegoat holds a mirror to that person's like, this is what
Exactly.
you are. I see you, right? Like,
Yeah,
I see what you're doing,
exactly.
which is why they
Exactly.
double down on the scapegoat and get all the people who are within that abuse to also shift blame to the scapegoat to keep blame off of the narcissist.
Yeah, gathering the troops and circling the wagons. It's all classic, family dysfunction. And, no matter what socioeconomic, background you may come from, those dynamics are very predictable in a dysfunctional family. And again, that's not all of us, but to some degree, that's most of us. It is what ails the human race at large, and what I believe is rising to the surface of our conscious awareness in so many ways as we speak.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry
no
because I have my
worries.
son screaming in the background right now. That'll be edited out, so no big deal. So yeah, the what you just touched on, like it's rising to the surface amongst the collective right now. So from my perspective, and I was thinking about this on my ride home before I got on this call with you, because I was just sitting and thinking, like, so many people are running around. I'm glad that you brought up that statistic of how many families are in a dysfunctional state. So how many people to some degree have dealt with trauma, and trauma is relative, have dealt with some form of narcissistic abuse, may or may not have, but nonetheless trauma that they've experienced, and have things that have been impressed upon them, and have been severed from their intuition. And I could go into how we learn in Western culture, where we're taught what to think rather than how to think. We're not taught
Mhm.
to trust our intuition. But nonetheless, we have a large amount of adults running around that are really actually have the emotional intelligence and are in touch with themselves on the level of like a 4 or 5 year old kid, right? And it's like,
At best.
at best, right? And it's right now at this time in history, I wonder if it's the people who have not healed their own trauma that are not able to see the collective issues that we're dealing with as it pertains to narcissistic abuse.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept to chew on,
Mm-hmm.
and to think about. All I know, Alec, is that we are going through a much needed shift in consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that is not in alignment with where we are headed has to rise to the surface. Like, Just like for the individual, and I did this in my own life for a long time, you know, denying, hiding, and pretending. I hated being the girl with the issues. So I was real good at making it all look good on the outside. Meanwhile, as you've heard me say time and time again, and I didn't make this up, I learned this myself in 12-step recovery, but left untreated, these issues get worse, not better over time.
Mm-hmm. Oh
I'll
my
say that
God, yeah.
again. Left untreated, these issues get worse, not better over time, right? So, you know, there I am making it all look good on the outside, which was akin to putting a nice thick layer of pink paint over a pile of manure. And the longer that went on, the more the manure stank, right? And what I learned, I finally cried uncle and surrendered at a certain point when I got real serious about my personal healing and recovery, which, you know, that I'd been on a path for a long time, but the deep work really began in 2005. And what I learned was wherever I go, there I am. And I cannot run from what I carry subconsciously. It's going to follow me everywhere I go. And it's just going to keep growing and getting bigger and bigger and uglier and more painful and nastier as time goes on. So I really have to learn to stand still, stop sedating myself, stop self-medicating, feel the feelings, go inside, do the work, make the connections, up level, heal, and shift. And although that was uncomfortable and ugly and messy and no fun for some people who, you know, needed to be confronted about some things, and, you know, like there's a process over a number of years that went on, it was absolutely vital for me to get to where I am today, where I can serve in the way that I do, right? A journey. And I fully believe that's what's going on collectively. Everything that has been hiding in the shadows, hiding in the dark, all the secrets, all the lies, all the distortions, all the gaslighting, all the manipulation, that rock is being lifted, as we were talking about before we went, you know, we hit record. That rock is being lifted, and all the ugly squigglies are being exposed. And a lot of people don't want to look. You know, they just don't want to look, right? Because denial is more comfortable, so we think consciously, but long term, it's actually far more painful and far more destructive.
Yeah, and like to touch on that real quick is like as it pertains to, let's say, COVID-19, without getting into some of the finer details behind it, but we have, as an example, the Great Barrington Declaration, which was this group of, I think now 130,000 doctors worldwide who are signing on saying that they don't agree with the lockdown measures and the other measures that that governments all over the world have used to address COVID-19, right? That's without even going down the rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
just that alone, amongst some other true statistics, you try to show that to people who are buying into the system that they've always bought into, and they cannot and will not see it. And like some of the information is so blatantly obvious, but because they're still caught up in this delusional, to their not to their own fault to some degree, right? But the system that they were born into, that they haven't addressed and started to heal and understand their own issues and understand their own trauma, so they're not able to see the collective trauma because they bought into the system for their entire lives. They won't look at it.
100%. You know, what I know for sure is that recovery from anything, whether that's an addiction, codependency, narcissistic abuse, adult child syndrome, which fundamentally means, you know, having grown up in an abusive family environment, and all the ways that manifests as we grow into our adult lives. Recovery is about two things. It's about growing up and waking up. Mm-hmm. So for us to think that these are mutually exclusive issues is very naive. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever is going on with us collectively is going on with us individually. And whatever is going on with us individually is going on with us collectively. And, you know, there is an agenda, in my opinion, mm-hmm. that is, there's an attempt for this agenda to be rolled out. Mm-hmm. And the moment you go near that type of conversation, and I've been awake to this agenda for easily a decade. Mm-hmm. And the moment—
Is it weird to see it come to fruition like right now? Like it's happening.
Oh,
like it's happening.
I mean, you know, wow, right?
Yeah, because
So
so many people like you have said the same thing. Like it's like that one meme where it's like when conspiracy theorists like realize like it's like a person sweating, like realize like all the shit that they've been talking about is now happening. It's like, oh my God.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, this agenda is very much about narcissistic abuse on a global scale, in my opinion.
Mhm.
You go anywhere near that subject and people will call you crazy, like suddenly you're a lunatic, right?
Mhm.
How could that possibly be? Well, I don't know. Look at the evidence. You tell me, right?
Mhm.
And the problem is most people are too busy in survival mode,
Yeah.
just trying to keep a roof over their heads and their marriages together and their kids fed, and they're just, and that's by design. That's not an accident. The human race has been manipulated to where we are today for millennia,
Mhm.
my experience. But in my opinion, how this ties into narcissistic abuse is that it's happening on a global scale, run by super sociopaths, such
Absolutely.
extreme levels of sociopathy that we can't even imagine. And therein lies the problem, when we can't conceive that something, and this happens to the individual who's being narcissistically abused. I deal with this with my clients day in and day out.
Mhm.
The cognitive dissonance that arises from, I'm an empath, or at the very least a person who carries empathy, who has the compassion, the capacity for compassion and empathy. So I can't understand how my husband, my girlfriend, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my boss, my colleague, my whoever can think, do, or say these things, because they're so far removed from who I am and what I would ever be capable of thinking, doing, or saying, right? So the cognitive dissonance involved in, coming to terms with, yes, your parents are supposed to love you, but unfortunately, they're the ones who have done the most damage because they themselves were so damaged long
Yeah.
before you even were on the scene, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's really, where it all, the crossover between what's happening in the macrocosm and the microcosm, right? It's happening in
Mhm.
individual lives, and it's happening across our world before our very eyes, where we cannot fathom that this agenda, I've been awake to it for quite some time, and I believe you have as well, but most people still to this day cannot fathom that agenda is being played out, that they are being lied to the degree that they are. How could that be? Because they are decent, kind-hearted, hardworking, honest human beings, and it's outside of the realm of what's possible for them. And that's why recovery is about growing up and waking up. When we grow up and wake up, we tell ourselves the truth.
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up. And I remember specifically in doing work with me, you brought up how people who are empaths project their own sense of virtue and empathy for other people onto people who are not empathetic. Like, and it's
Exactly.
really hard to break through that understanding that, holy shit, this person that is supposed to have, or for collective purposes, this organization or group or system or expert is supposed to have my best interest in mind. They say that they do, but what is happening is that they're using my empathy against me to abuse me. And that's what's happening so much in some of these systems that people are buying into, because they are well-intentioned, empathetic people, and they receive this message of, hey, we care. They buy into that system. And that's where I think this is something that I had written down in my notes as well, touching on like the difference between covert narcissism and overt narcissism.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to touch on that?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
Okay. So, just like codependency doesn't always manifest the exact same way, not all codependents are control freaks, as an example, but many are, right? Not all codependents are passive wallflower doormats, right? But some are, right? So, just like in codependency, the symptoms don't manifest the same way. The same can be said for people who land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. There are different flavors, different manifestations to this, what I believe is a mental, emotional, spiritual, psychological illness, dis-ease, right? So for those who are, narcissist and narcissism is a big buzzword of recent years, that gets thrown around a lot. Anyone who is the slightest bit self-congratulatory or, self-confident or has the courage to put themselves out there in any way is being labeled as a narcissist when, folks don't really understand what the implications of that label really means, right? But when we think about your classic narcissist, that is typically an overt, grandiose, entitled, very confident, very charming, very manipulative individual. Emotionally, psychologically manipulative, and then there's the abuse cycle of love bombing, devalue, discard, right? So all of that plays a part. So when we think about your classic narcissist, that's the picture for anyone who has any sort of grasp on this conversation. But there's a whole other flavor of narcissism that's a whole lot trickier to spot because they actually show up very differently. A covert narcissist, and I believe my biological mother was a classic high spectrum malignant covert narcissist. They don't show up grandiose. They carry just as much entitlement, but it's hidden, it's not obvious. They actually show up, they present initially very differently. They present as being very meek, very timid, very shy, very reserved, very insecure, and very anxious. None of those words are what we normally think of when we think of what a classic destructive narcissist is. And nonetheless, this is a very real personality type, cluster of personality traits that are equally as manipulative and destructive in relationships, highly, highly toxic. But again, they present very differently. They are far more concerned with how they are seen, how they are perceived, like to the point of obsessive compulsive. And they work very, very hard to be seen in a certain light, but you don't have to travel down the path too far with a covert narcissist before the entitlement, the irrational delusions of grandeur, the irrational entitlement, the emotional manipulation, and the really toxic nature of how they show up in a relationship becomes very clear. Especially if you know what you're looking for, it becomes very clear very quickly. But these are the ones who really manage to dupe a lot of people because
and maybe do more harm in the process, right? Because it doesn't appear as if they have any sort of like, it's so much harder to spot, right?
Yeah, it's easy to be duped either way. Even the most highly trained clinicians, who in the field will admit to working with high spectrum destructive narcissists, overt or covert, for months before cluing in to the fact that that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah, well, I've witnessed that within my own family. Like, some of the people in my family who have shown traits of narcissism and done manipulative things that harmed quite a few people in my family system, going to see people who like therapists who are trained on narcissism, right? Like actually trained on it, not even understanding that they were too being manipulated by the narcissist until like 5 to 6 months into working with them.
And what's really sad about that statement that you just made is the vast majority of family therapists, of psychotherapists, aren't trained.
Yeah.
I've had a number of 20 plus year veteran family psychotherapists come to me and come through my program
Wow.
as a life coach specializing in these issues, because they were struggling so severely with the narcissistic abuse going on in their own lives, whether it was their marriage, their family of origin, what have you, and they were ill-equipped, never mind to help their clients, but even to help themselves. And each one of them reported the same thing to me. It was not part of my education. There might have been a paragraph addressing these issues and you know, and then we can look at the grand scheme of things, and why would that be? That would not be part of the training of the people in the helping profession.
Oh boy, it's crazy you brought that up, because I sort of related that back to some other things, like how doctors are not taught about nutrition, like one of the fundamental things for health. And it's like, if I mean, 80 to 95% of families, I think that was a figure you said, are dysfunctional. And I fully believe that. I mean, you see how, especially in Western cultures, how much dysfunction we're dealing with. I think some of it intentional, right? Why they wouldn't want people to be trained in helping alleviate and heal and really pay attention to that dysfunction, especially when it's propagated by a narcissistic person or organization.
Exactly.
It makes you go, huh, like that's one of those things that makes, when you step back and see it from the outside, you're like, why is that? And I think you and I both know the answer to that. And that, again, like for people who have been formally trained on some of these things, and this goes into intuition as well. The way that we learn in the United States is we are taught what to think rather than how to think. And so when we're brought up in a formal education system that is teaching us exactly what to think rather than how to think, a lot of, I guess, professionals in various fields automatically defer to what they were taught rather than continuing their learning and trusting their own intuition as a guide to discern whether what they have learned needs more refinement or may be completely untrue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The indoctrination of the human race. And with all that's gone on in this last 6 to 8 months that we observe, one of the things that I was not as aware of as I am today is the extent to which like I'm in my 50s today, right? So
I did not know that. You're in your 50s?
Yeah.
You do not look like you're in your 50s at all. I would guess like at the most early 40s. That's crazy. Okay, I didn't know that.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Early 50s to be precise. But the point being, social media is a fascinating place, right? And even though I limit the time that I spend there, there's a certain amount of things that just cross your feed regardless. And I've come to understand that, for example, my friends who have kids who are currently studying at university or have recently graduated from university see the world through a very specific lens. Mm-hmm. And it's one that serves the super sociopathic agenda.
Absolutely.
And it's because they've been fully indoctrinated. And, while the adults are all going about their business, really not fully aware and understanding. And I don't have children, but I'm guilty of this as well. I didn't realize the extent to which this is a reality up until, observing a lot of what's been going on. I'm in Canada, you're in the States, but just what's been going on with, some of the movements and the riots and the, and the opinions flying around the internet, these distorted perceptions of reality. And it's, mm-hmm. and they hold these beliefs to a man because, they learned it in school, which is no different than, the folks who, it's got to be true, CNN said it.
That's what that was going to be my next question, actually, is like, from the lens of what you understand regarding narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and manipulating people using their empathy and their lack of using their intuition for their own selves, how is, or I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to word this question is, how much is the media involved in gaslighting the public?
In my personal opinion, mm-hmm. the mainstream media, mm-hmm. because there's,
yes, mainstream.
There's an alternative media that I believe is the news now. right?
Yes.
Where we go to get our information and our facts and have for a long time. But the mainstream media, in my personal opinion, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, as we sit here today, the human race is being gaslit on such a scale that when the truth finally does rise to the surface, sooner or later it will, I fully believe, it's going to be excruciating for a lot of people when they believe the extent to which they have been led down the garden path. The mainstream media is lying through their teeth on a daily basis. So much so, I think they're contributing to the awakening, because slowly but surely people are realizing, well, that doesn't add up. Well, that doesn't make sense. But 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, I heard so-and-so say such and such, and now you're reporting the opposite. And you can only do that to the public so many times before people start to see the discrepancies, right? So, yeah.
Really cool that you say that too. Two like anecdotal pieces. So I remember at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was doctors from all over the world giving their testimony as to how they were using intravenous vitamin C to treat patients effectively, and it was working really well. And then as those doctors were surfacing from all over the world, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter were all just censoring the shit out of them, like would not allow these doctors to speak. And me believing what I believe regards to natural health and sort of seeing this coming, right? I was like, oh my God. And I would draw attention to that on Facebook, like these doctors giving their valid medical opinion, providing an effective treatment for this brand new scary thing that we're dealing with, are being censored. What the hell's up with that? And people that buy into the mainstream narrative were like, oh, well, they're probably spreading misinformation, which I'm like, okay, I could see that to a certain degree if you buy into that. But then when a randomized clinical trial came out like a month ago that showed people that were treated with intravenous vitamin C had a 60% better chance of surviving from COVID than those that weren't. And this randomized clinical trial, peer-reviewed, published in a medical journal. I posted that on my social media and I was like, this could have saved lives. Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube are complicit in basically possibly causing massive harm, right? Because they censored these doctors. Even crazier, that post that I made and I had addressed the randomized controlled trial was removed from Instagram for violating the arbitrary community guidelines,
Yeah.
which obviously like not surprising to me. But the coolest part about this was I had like 50 people who were following me, but had never really said anything, like not really said a word. You don't really know how they feel. And not that it matters. Message me and like, oh my God. Right. Just like you said.
The censorship alone has woken up a lot of people, you know, which is why I'm so confident in the outcome. One of my favorite spiritual texts is A Course in Miracles.
Oh, I love it.
And
Yeah.
one of my favorite quotes from A Course in Miracles, and this I hold dear to my heart for family of origin reasons, as well as, you know, what's going on on a grand scale. The quote is, he or she who is certain of the outcome can afford to wait and wait without anxiety.
I love that.
And as I sit and observe what's going on so many levels, I become more and more certain of the outcome by the day. So I can afford to wait and wait without anxiety. Just like some personal things with my family of origin, where I know the truth, whether it's this side of the veil or that side of the veil. Y'all can lie all you want, right? And I try to, you know, impress this upon my clients as well, sometimes with more success than others. But the reality is, like, we're in 3D here. This is not all there is. And whether it's on this side of the veil or that side of the veil, sooner or later, all truth will be known. All truth. So you can lie and hide and smear and, you know, distort and, you know, do all of that individually in our individual lives, or on a, you know, the mainstream media and big tech on a grand scale. But make no mistake, the truth wins. The truth carries a vibration 1,000 times more powerful than any lie ever will. So, you know, when you understand the energetics, the metaphysics of it all, it's very easy to see what the outcome is going to be. And the more big tech censors the truth movement, the more people come looking for the truth movement. So a couple of weeks ago, there's a number of folks that we have been tuning into for quite some time to stay abreast of what we believe is really going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of credibility with us over time. They have proven their worth, their salt with us. And the day that a certain information around a certain laptop was being
Mm-hmm.
revealed about a certain individual, they were all axed from YouTube. And we all knew, like, there was so much censoring going on even prior to that. We all knew it was coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in one foul swoop, all of these channels who are, now mounting this court case and what have you, but they were all, removed from YouTube. And
Yep.
some of them had been, years in the making, hundreds of thousands of followers,
Yeah.
right? And there's all that work like gone in a day, right?
Yeah.
He who has nothing to hide hides nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So that level of censorship and the timing of it woke up easily tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we can bring that back to the individual who's struggling with a destructive narcissist in their life. One of the most painful, and I know this from personal experience because I've had it so often with, an aunt in particular, an uncle in particular, my own mother, my father, my stepmother, people running smear campaigns, right? It's what really sick, high spectrum, destructive narcissists do, especially if you're a threat.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a threat in any way. And, my own journey brought me to a place where I am virtually unaffected by what others have to say about me, good, bad, or indifferent. Of course, the good stuff feels good. It's nice
Mm-hmm.
to know I'm having a positive impact, and I really feel on purpose and on mission, but I don't get high on it like I would have pre-recovery when I was really suffering from self-love deficit disorder.
Yeah.
Nor do I get taken out by the negative stuff anymore. Like, that's the beautiful thing about, a recovery program and process over time that really works, is you get to a place where you stand in your own self-agency, you stand as a sovereign being, carrying your own worth, your own sense of self-love and self-esteem. So they can smear all they want, couldn't care less. It doesn't even land, right? Whereas there was a time where it would absolutely have taken me out. And that's one of the things that we deal with when I'm working with clients, is because inevitably when they start standing up for them, and this, you've had the experience yourself, when you
Mm-hmm.
start standing up for yourself and drawing a line in the sand and setting boundaries and saying no more, they have to make you the problem. They have to make you the issue. And in early recovery, it's one of the biggest challenges. It's excruciatingly painful to have people you love lying to people you love, and people you love believing the lies.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievably painful to go through that. When we can heal all of that stuff and get to the other side of it, standing in our own truth, we're free for real. We're sovereign for real. And I fully believe that is the direction that the human race is headed in.
Yeah, because that can't be taken from you either. Like, once you are
That's right.
firm in that, they can do whatever they want, especially once you realize that we are eternal beings, right? Like, that cannot be taken from you. So like, you can throw whatever you want at people like you and I, and it's like, keep it coming, motherfucker. Like, I'm not standing down to this. I'm so firm in my convictions and I'm standing in love and truth, and I'm setting this boundary, and you cannot take that away from me.
And I'm bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so much more powerful than you and your petty little lies.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how disgusting and distorted they may be, and no matter how many of your little minions may be believing them right now, trust me when I tell you the truth will be revealed. It's just a question of time. It's not even a question. The outcome is certain. She who is certain of the outcome can afford to wait, and wait without anxiety. And that early recovery journey that so many of us have to travel, that dark night of the soul that so many of us have to go through, I believe is what the vast majority of the human race has coming.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us are, you know, maybe, and it's never a value issue. We all have value. None of us are better, you know, more special, none of that. That's codependency. That's narcissistic abuse, this nonsense about superiority and
Yep.
inferiority and all of that, right? But, you know, those of us who are a little further ahead on the path, who, you know, understand what's really going on beyond 3D reality and how it all plays into what's happening in our individual lives and the collective right now more than ever as we go through these intense times. We know what we know and stand on the firm foundation of the truth that we stand on for a reason, because we're here to help support those who have yet to begin their own personal or collective healing and recovery journey, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're the ones who are going to have to be present and able to extend the hand and say, it's going to be okay. Hurts
Yeah.
like hell right now, but it's going to be okay, you know?
Yeah. It's so cool that you say that too. Cause like, as I was wrapping up working with you, and my mom was as well, like the program that we went through, your program, which was phenomenal. And for anyone who's resonated with what Tamie said so far, I highly recommend you check her out. I'll give her an opportunity at the end to plug all of her stuff. So she'll touch on that at the end. But I kept on like asking like the why, you know, why I went through all that. Cause like I'd really started healing it for the first time. And I was like, okay, like this is great, but I just want to know why. Not from like a, oh, why me position. It's like, there has to be a reason that I went through this in order to help other people. Like, I don't know what it was. And my mom kept on saying, and my mom's so connected to her intuition at that time as well. She kept on saying something big is going to happen in 2020. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it. Something big is going to happen. This was like August 2019. And like me, my wife, my sister, and my little brother were like, Mom, shut up. Like she said it over and over and over again. We were like, shut up. Like nothing's going to happen. And sure enough, COVID hits. Right. And then like, as we continued to observe, first off, I like validated my mom. I was like, Mom, my God, you were right. Like month into COVID, I was like, holy shit, you were
Imagine
absolutely
that your mom was right.
yeah, I know, right? Imagine that. My mom's intuition is like none other. But like
Love
3
Alec.
months. Yeah, I know she's fucking awesome. It's cool because so many people are resonating with what she says, and it's because of people like you helping her see that we can now help others see. You know what I mean? That's like the step. It's like the each one teach
The
one
way it
thing.
works.
Yeah.
I had so much help to get to where I am and still do. Yeah, and still do. I still have guides and mentors and support. And, you know, like that's our job, is to get the support that we need for ourselves. Right. So yeah, it's the way it works. It's the ripple effect. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's so cool. The blessing in our collective, I want to say, trauma that we're experiencing right now is that now I know that this is why I went through what I went through, because I can see with such clarity, because I've dealt with narcissistic abuse, and then thanks to people like you and another guy I worked with, Chris Page, but like instrumental in helping me heal that, right? And then address it and help other people understand with such a clear lens of what's going on. And I think the last question that I have, because I doubt anyone who is on that side of the spectrum is going to listen to this anyway. I think this question would be more appropriate, is for people who are in relationships with people who cannot see, or people who are in friendships with people who are in a state of cognitive dissonance right now. What are some steps for the people that can see, that understand all this stuff, that they can take to help those people that are in a state of cognitive dissonance or are in a state of just complete blind obedience to the agenda that's going on?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, I've learned a lot in 2020. And, you know, one of the things I think is most important to keep our eye on the ball of unity consciousness. Anything that divides us, like, look, the truth is, I believe we're in the midst of an information war. We're in the midst of World War III, but it's not playing out as we would have envisioned it a few years ago, right? It's playing out quite differently, and you know, mainly information warfare.
Mhm.
And it's it is the battle between light and dark, and I fully believe the battle has already been won, but it's what do we have to go through to get there?
Mhm.
And anything that divides us does not serve us. So
Mhm.
although I have, a certain perspective and certain belief systems, and, I lean in a certain direction, I've learned to keep that to myself for the most part. I mean, there are times when it's important to speak up and speak your truth, and I trust my intuition and my guidance in that regard. But if it's not necessary for me to verbalize my viewpoint, I don't.
Mhm.
I tested the waters with that a little bit at a certain point last summer, because I felt a burden of responsibility. If I have a following, should I not be speaking the truth? Because, like, look, shit's going down on this planet, right? Like,
Yeah, my
I felt
God.
I felt a burden of responsibility, but so I walked that a little bit and learned some powerful lessons. It was good. It was a good exercise. I don't regret it. And anyone who knows me knows where I stand.
Mhm.
But, I can hold those cards close to my chest and still be standing in my integrity and my truth,
Mhm.
with my main focus being on a couple of things: unity consciousness and reaching for 5D.
Yeah.
The reality is we are ascending to the fifth dimension.
Mhm.
And that, I believe, I understand, and I believe is a certainty. We are now at the place where it's a certainty. It's a question of what we have to go through to get there. So, arguing about whether or not there's enough evidence for this, or whether or not this is true or that's false, or who's right or who's wrong, all that does is lower our individual frequency, and it doesn't contribute to the solution. Just like in our personal healing and recovery, because you heard me say it 1,000 times, yes, we have to tell ourselves the truth about the problem, but then we have to focus all of our time, energy, and attention on the solutions if we want to make forward progress, right? How many times
Mhm.
did you hear me say that?
Um, all the time.
Countless, right?
Yeah,
Countless,
because
right?
I needed to hear it too.
If we're staring at the problem all the live long day, never. And that's the unfortunate thing about a lot of narcissistic abuse recovery forums on the internet, is that it's just a rehashing of the problem. Well, how about we tell ourselves the truth about that? Yes, acknowledge it, no denial. I don't do denial. But now let's pour our light, our energy, our focus, our attention, which is fully a creative power, into solutions that actually work. And if you're after solutions, they're going to come racing towards you. It's a question of time. So if that works individually, for sure that works collectively.
Mhm.
So the person who's really struggling with being surrounded by people who are holding a different viewpoint or opinion, and I can't even imagine, because my man and I are so aligned in our viewpoints. It's such a gift and a blessing. And then I have friends like yourself and your mom and many other friends, where we can just have these deep, rich conversations because we get it and we get each other, right?
Mhm.
If you don't have that, find it one way or
Mhm.
another, even if it means, through the internet.
Yeah.
Having a support system of like-minded people is more powerful than most people realize. And focus on unity consciousness and reaching for 5D. So my number one job on this planet as a light worker on a mission is to anchor a specific frequency, which I believe I've been doing since the day I was conceived.
Mhm.
It's obvious because I've been a disruptor from the time I walk into a room, I don't have to open my mouth,
Mhm.
right? Like that's many of us, right? That's our experience. So that's my number one job. Now that happens whether I open my mouth and do anything or not. But how much more powerful when I actually make the conscious choice to focus my energy and attention there.
Mhm.
So really, taking care of myself, doing my personal healing and recovery work, paying attention to whether or not I'm projecting and what I might be projecting, because we all do. Those of us who have done healing and recovery work aren't projecting as much. And if we know, if we've done the work and we understand, we catch ourselves in it, right? But, we're always, as long as we're incarnated, going to have that propensity. So, really, as they say in 12 step, taking my own inventory far more than I'm taking yours. And just choosing to focus on the right things, carrying the highest vibration that I possibly can, and not getting into divisive arguments and fights. And there's a time for sure when we have to stand up and speak the truth. Absolutely. It just doesn't mean that, spiritual doesn't mean that we roll over, right? But, making that our set point, our predominant focus, and reaching for 5D, which means a higher level of consciousness, letting go of fear, letting go of anxiety, managing what I expose myself to, whether that's the mainstream media, which I don't and haven't for a long, long time, toxic people, toxic environments. I just don't go there. I've been on this path for a long time. And in spite of all the tools and all the healing and all the recovery, I'm still affected if I'm exposed to really toxic people.
Yeah, well, it's because energetically you cannot go near it. You know what I mean?
That's
You
right.
cannot, you just do not resonate with it at all. So you cannot touch it,
So I'm really, really diligent about, being careful about who and what I expose myself to. And sometimes that's tricky because it's, for folks that I work with, well, it's family. Tammy, do I have to divorce or amputate my whole family? No, you don't, not necessarily. I personally did, but that's not everybody's journey. It was in my best interest to do so. That's not for everybody. But really, exercising extreme self-care, giving yourself permission to say no, or no thank you, or not this time, or maybe next time. And instead, I'm going to stay home in my little bubble and nurture myself and get the rest that I need and do what I need to do to take care of me, so that I am living out my number one job and responsibility, which is to anchor in the highest frequency that I can at this time. Love, unity, patience and tolerance, but with boundaries.
With boundaries, yes. Compassion with boundaries. I say that all the time too. It's have compassion for where they are, but this is my boundary. You're not imposing your will or your way of thinking upon me, right?
Yeah.
I won't step into your space and try to make you see, right? Yeah. But you're not going to impose your will upon me. I have compassion. I understand where you are, why you are where you are, but that's not going to step over. You're not stepping over this line.
And 1,000%. And, for the empaths, starseeds, and, light workers or potential light workers out there, understand that you are a walking mirror. So, which is why self-care is so important, and dealing with our own stuff is so important, because, I had the experience today. Someone I love dearly in my life, I'm making a decision to go right, and they're making a decision to go left, and that's cool. I have no issue with that. But the fact that I'm making a decision to go right is triggering all of their own denial. And that's not my stuff. And pre-recovery, when I was fully codependent, I would have taken all of that on. And today, I can recognize the difference between what's yours and what's mine. And that's vital. So I know that as an empath, I walk through the world and I am a mirror reflecting back to people. And that makes some people real uncomfortable. And that's not my problem. That's, as long as I am, behaving in a decent, respectful, kind, loving way, your triggers are not my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a tricky path, but we can walk it with grace. It's just a conscious choice.
Yeah, especially with a lot of people being triggered nowadays. Yeah, that was so good, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. So Tamie, where can people find you and your work and your programs that you offer for life coaching and helping people navigate codependency and narcissistic abuse?
Well, I run an 8-week transformational coaching program called the Freedom Class.
Best thing
And
I've ever done, by the way. Like for real, like I cannot speak highly of that enough. It is like, it was life changing for me, paradigm shifting.
I'm so glad. It was such an honor and a privilege to work with you.
Thank you.
We did, you know, when I'm working with someone who's willing to play full out and do the work, as uncomfortable as it can be sometimes, that really is the most amazing gift. You know, it's such a rewarding journey together that we walk, right?
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
think you've
so
seen me cry more than any person that I know.
and so important to let it
Yes,
out, right? Like we
exactly.
cry, we have these wounded little children inside of us who were told to be seen and not heard, and stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, and we're frozen inside. And you know, when we start to touch on that tender aspect of ourselves, there's a thawing out process, but it's got to come up and come out. And what
Hmm.
is the peace and the freedom like on the other side of all of that, Alec?
Oh my God. Like I truly am so comfortable with who I am today. I am so comfortable expressing myself. And I reconnected with the fact that naturally, when I was born onto this earth in this lifetime, I am a loving, compassionate, and understanding human being. And I severed myself, or I was severed from that. And until
Mhm.
I healed that severing and peeled off all of those layers and looked at them individually, like, is this something that I want to take with me? And then
Yeah,
threw it out if I didn't. And if I wanted to keep it, kept it back on my body. Um,
exactly.
until I did that, I had always, I'd been living a complete misrepresentation of who Alec Zeck is. And
Hmm.
now, like, I feel so unbelievably free. And it's
Hmm.
interesting because I, in speaking my truth, again, from a position of love, compassion, understanding, I receive so much more backlash than I ever have. But it's like, to a certain degree, sometimes it affects me, no question, because I'm a human being. Like, something
Of
like, damn,
course.
that's a hurtful
Yeah.
comment. But for
Yeah.
the most
That
part,
was
I'm like,
mean.
yeah, that was mean. Darn.
Yeah.
Okay, that really sucked. Let's do some emotional freedom technique on that. But no, then I truly am. I feel so unbelievably free, and it's like, it's helping other people too. Like, I am helping validate other people and helping them find options to navigate this process and heal themselves as well, which is, that's the most important piece, like,
Mhm.
is being able to help other people do it as well, which I know obviously you can attest to that as well, is helping other people get out of the grips of these oppressive systems and the lies that they bought into about their reality and themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all about the peace and freedom on the other side, right? Like that feeling good in your own skin for the first time in your life, you know, like
Yeah.
that's the gift, right? But
Hmm.
okay, so to finish what you asked a question, and I kind of go
Yeah.
all over a little bit. So the Freedom Class is an 8-week transformational coaching program, the details of which can be found at tamiemcoaching.com. So that's TAMIE. M is in Mary. That's my grandmother's name,
Mhm.
Mary. Coaching.com. And I have recently started focusing on YouTube to put out a ton of free value and content. So for folks who want to learn more about codependency, narcissistic abuse, and more importantly, the solutions, Tamie M. Joyce on YouTube is a good place to find me. I'm all over the social medias for now.
Yeah,
So
for now.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and there are links in all of those places and on my website, tamiemcoaching.com, to connect with me one way or another, whatever's appropriate for the individual. So yeah, that's where all
Awesome.
the info is.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes too. So, Tamie, this is awesome. It was perfect because I had the idea to sort of tie in everything that happens on the individual level for people who have dealt with narcissistic abuse to what's going on in the collective right now, and we touched on that so perfectly. So this was great. You're phenomenal to talk to, and you're so knowledgeable on this topic, obviously, and such a light. So I really appreciated this conversation.
I had a whole lot of fun. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It was really a good time. It's great to be able to have these conversations freely,
Mm,
and speak your heart and hopefully touch some hearts out there along the way. So thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tamie.